Hola a todos, buenas tardes, ¿me escuchan bien?
Perfect.
Thank you, Melanie. Pues, ¿qué tal a todos? Buenas tardes, nuevamente a este evento organizado por el Consejo Nacional de Biogás. Este día vamos a presentar el webinar Fundamentos de la digestión anaerobia, pero antes, para quien es su primer acercamiento con el Consejo Nacional de Biogás, déjenme hablarles brevemente de esta asociación. Voy a compartir mi pantalla. Pues nuevamente sean bienvenidos a este evento. El Consejo Nacional de Biogás es una asociación civil sin fines de lucro constituida en 2018 que busca integrar a todos los involucrados en el sector biogás en México. Esta agrupación no es exclusivamente empresarial o académica, ya busca ser incluyente porque reconoce que únicamente con la participación de los interesados en la materia, se podrá verdaderamente incidir en el avance de esta opción sustentable para el manejo de residuos orgánicos. El objeto social del Consejo Nacional de Biogás es impulsar el desarrollo sustentable de la cadena de valor del sector biogás a partir del aprovechamiento energético de residuos mediante la colaboración, el desarrollo de capacidades y soluciones técnicas e incidencia política y regulatoria. Ahora, les voy a presentar a la doctora Melanie Hecht. Melanie es licenciada en Ciencias Biológicas y doctora en Ciencias Agrícolas en la optimización de procesos biológicos en plantas de digestión anaerobia. Ella se ha desarrollado como consultora para el control de procesos de digestión anaerobia desde 2007 y es gerente senior de cuentas clave en el líder del mercado alemán Schumann Bioenergy. Hace varias consultas con empresas asociadas en todo el mundo, como FM Bioenergy. En el Reino Unido da conferencias regularmente sobre optimización de procesos de digestión anaerobia a nivel nacional e internacional. Thank you, Melanie, for being here. I don't know if you can hear me.
Now I'm on mute. Absolutely, yes, perfectly. Crystal clear.
Thank you, Melanie. I know that in Germany it's really, really late, so thank you for your time.
You're more than welcome.
So take the microphone, the audience is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I'll share my screen. Hope that'll work. Okay, I think you should be seeing this now. This should be my first slide, correct? Okay.
Yes, Melanie.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak in Mexico, where I have been in 2019 with our local partner, Victor, who might be in the audience now. I'm going to introduce him in a minute. I've been asked to talk about fundamentals of anaerobic digestion. It is a presentation that will give an overview over many topics, but cannot go into detail due to the limited amount of time. This presentation might raise more questions than it answers, but that is part of the intention. There is a lot more to know about biogas than I am going to show within this 1 hour time frame. Before I start on the fundamentals, let me please introduce quickly the company I work for and myself. I work for the company Schumann Bioenergy, which is part of a larger holding. And we specialize on consultancy for animal husbandry and, in my case, anaerobic digestion and feedstock conservation. And we operate worldwide. Don't put too much stock into the highlighted countries. We have partners and subsidiaries in many countries. I work very closely with 3 other country representatives. On the left is myself with shorter hair, my colleague Emiliano from Italy, my colleague Paul from Austria, and my colleague Birgit from Germany. And we all work as key account managers and work very closely with biogas specialists worldwide. So I work very closely, for example, with the colleagues in the United Kingdom, in Canada, and the USA. And altogether, we are a team of over 60 biogas specialists worldwide. We run an estate, a research estate in the north of Germany, where we also have 2 biogas sites, a larger one and a smaller one, that we use for research purposes. That's the larger one and the smaller one. One is crop-based, one is slurry-based, and we test our own products in those biogas installations. We have a research laboratory. We do our own in-house research and product development, and also offer any biogas analytics that is necessary on a biogas installation that ranges from volatile fatty acids to trace elements to biogas yields to any analysis that you need on a biogas site. Our approach is hands-on. That means we go on site. We consult worldwide, but that doesn't mean we're only on the phone or only via email, but we go on site. We have partners and subsidiaries in countries, but we also go there ourselves. So as I said, I myself have been to Mexico. I have been to biogas plants with our partner, Victor. And that looks like that. We look into the digester if possible. We judge the surface. We look at, is there foam? What's the stirring like? What do the gas bubbles look like? What's the desulfurization, the sulfur deposits, and so on and so forth. We look at feedstocks. We take samples. We discuss analysis with the operators, explain and interpret, troubleshoot and optimize. We look at feedstock compositions, what makes sense, what does not work together, what is a good feedstock, what's the gas yield going to be like. We are also forage conservation specialists, that is, we are ensiling specialists for grass, maize, whole crop, for any silages, and we consult on that as well. In Europe, we offer gas leakage detection. That is, my colleague Carsten goes on site with an infrared camera and tries to detect gas leakages. That is methane. He can detect methane with his camera. I don't know if we offer that service in Mexico. I need to discuss that with my boss first. But it is a very, very valuable tool in our toolbox. We interpret data based on samples, that is analysis, but also site data. We look at the technical bits and bobs of plants, what stirrers, what are the stirring times, what sort of hopper is being used, anything that you can think of, temperature, obviously, feedstocks, everything that comes to mind. And we take all that into consideration and optimize when necessary, troubleshoot when necessary, find the problem and solve it, be it with feedstocks changes, temperature changes, with product addition, anything that is necessary. Our boot on the ground would be our partner, Victor Basurto. He's got an MSc and PhD in animal nutrition and reproduction. He's got 45 years of experience on his back, 24 years at Cargill Purina alone. And he is a very, very experienced specialist in the field of animal nutrition. And he very quickly understood biogas, and he would be able to come on site, give first advice, maybe dial us in if necessary, take samples, send them to labs, and help with interpretation and troubleshooting. And apart from being a fantastic host when I was over, and a brilliant animal nutritionist, he is a long distance sea swimmer, which I find really impressive. Okay, that was us very quickly. So that is what we do in our team of over 60 biogas specialists worldwide. And that is a very, very extensive network I can tap into. There's hardly any feedstock we haven't seen, any problem we haven't encountered. So we are seeing and treating and consulting for over 3,000 biogas sites worldwide. But that brings me to my agenda. Let me start here. Anaerobic digestion. I'll give a quick technical layout. I didn't know what audience to expect, so I'll show some pictures of biogas sites and explain very quickly how a biogas site works. That might be absolutely bananas for some, but it might be important information for others. I'll dip into the biological process. How does that work? What do the microbes in the digester do? Then I'm going to go into more detail on potential inhibitors in slurry and silages, and what risks pose N-rich, that is nitrogen-rich feedstocks. That's ammonia and hydrogen sulfide. Other potential process failures include trace element deficiency, high viscosity, that is very impaired mixing, and acidification. That is a huge amount of information if I were to go into detail, so I'll touch on all of it. And hopefully there is time afterwards for questions, or I can offer presentations, more detailed presentations on any of those subjects, plus forage conservation if you're interested. But let's get started. So anaerobic digestion, technical bits and bobs. A biogas site basically looks like this, some sort of digester, that is the tank that is being fed, the most biologically active tank. In this case, it's 2 digesters. You can have any number of digesters from 1 to upwards, sky's the limit. Then usually comes a post digester. Any residue from the 2 main digesters goes into the post digester and is further digested, and then into the storage tank from which it is extracted for spreading on the field. The gas, the methane, the biogas consists of plus minus 50-50 carbon dioxide and methane. That depends a bit on the feedstocks, but that's the 2 main components. And the methane is combustible. That is what we're after. We want to extract the energy that is in the methane, and you can either combust it in a CHP unit, that is an engine, or you can upgrade it to biogas. You can upgrade it to biomethane and then insert it into the grid. This is a schematics, feedstock input into the primary, secondary digester, gas storage in the membrane roofs, gas treatment, that is H2S removal, and then you either run the gas through a CHP unit or a gas treatment unit to produce biomethane. So that's one way of doing it. A very other way of doing it is a slurry lagoon. It's basically a hole in the ground. You cover it with a foil, trap the gas, and also either combust it or upgrade it to biomethane quality. This is a very different way of doing it. It's no better, no worse. It's very simple, but it can pose all sorts of problems as well. Just to give you an idea of what a biogas site looks like. Might be trivial for some, but maybe not for everyone. Now, the anaerobic digestion process happens in all tanks, but mainly in the digesters. It starts with very large molecules from the input feedstocks, be that silages, slurry, any sort of vegetable waste, food waste, rendering material waste, waste from breweries, anything could go, anything organic except wood can be broken down in a biogas plant. Wood cannot be digested in a biogas plant because the breakdown of lignin, that's wood, requires oxygen. And the anaerobic digestion process is oxygen free. So you start off with those very large molecules like proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. They're broken down in the first stage. It's called hydrolysis, into their monomers, into their components, that is, amino acids for the proteins, sugars for the carbohydrates, and fatty acids. It is then further degraded by, again, other bacteria, acidogenic bacteria, during acidogenesis, and all sorts of volatile fatty acids are produced, such as butyric acid and propionic acid and all sorts of acids, which are then again by other bacteria converted into in acetogenesis into acetic acid. Acetic acid is a direct precursor of methane. Acetic acid can be converted into methane. So this is 3 of 4 stages. Hydrolysis is the first step. Acidogenesis is acid production stage. Acetogenesis is acetic acid production stage. And then the last step is methanogenesis, when methane is produced and as a byproduct, carbon dioxide. I can see Victor now. Hi, Victor. Hey. Sorry for that. So this is the anaerobic digestion process. It is metabolized, it is run by hundreds of different species of bacteria, all in the same space and at the same time in the digester. There is no compartmentalization in a digester. There are systems of biogas plants that run a separate hydrolysis tank. But that is not necessarily the case for all biogas sites. Normally, you have one tank and all those processes run alongside each other at the same time, and they can inhibit each other. Yeah, there can be inhibitions. If one stage is inhibited, then the following stages cannot run. It's a bit like a traffic jam. Yeah, when lanes get blocked, cars can't pass. And it's the same here. The different stages metabolize each other's metabolites. And that is why it's very important that all stages run smoothly and that there is no inhibition in between. Yeah, this is to sort of visualize, to illustrate that the process takes place in the digester, same place, same time, and all the different stages run at the same time. Something that you need to take into consideration, especially when you commission a site, when you start a digester, or when there has been process failure, is microbial reproduction times. They are very different. They vary greatly between hydrolytic bacteria. They can be less than an hour, and some acetogenic bacteria take days, and that makes a huge difference. When you start a biogas digester, you need to give it time for all the bacteria to establish, for all the species to establish, and for all the different stages to establish. Yeah, the 4 stages to establish. This is to illustrate this. So reproduction times of bacteria vary greatly, and that is very important to take into consideration after problems in the digester. Process failure brings with it a loss of species and bacterial number. On the left, you see a diagram produced by a colleague of mine at university, Arne Dahlhoff. He made genetic characterization of the species present in a digester during stable operation. Never mind the species themselves. I don't want to focus on them. I want to show you, it's like a big bunch of flowers, of colorful flowers. You have all sorts of different species, yeah, in yellow and pink and red and blue and green. Yeah? But the idea is you have a large number of species, and it's like a chair with many legs that you sit on. If one leg of the chair breaks, never mind, it's still stable. You're still sitting at a table, you can eat your dinner, even if you lose one leg. After process failure, the picture is very different. It's a diagram on the right, and it's very visible that a lot of species have been lost, and that one species in particular, the purple one, has increased in size. It has made up for the lost numbers. But it's like your chair is only standing on 5 legs now, instead of before it was like 20. And if that one big leg breaks, that 70% purple leg, you have a major problem in your digester. And that's the situation after process failure that you have to take into consideration. We'll come to that in a minute when we talk about process failure, what to do. Idea, you inoculate. You inoculate again with active material to replenish the lost bacterial species, and you need to give it time. Yeah, microbial reproduction times. You need to give it time and trace elements, but we'll come to that in a minute. A very important environmental parameter for the bacteria is temperature in the digester. Another one is pH. I'm not going to go into detail on that one, but temperature is very important as well. There are 3 distinct temperature ranges we distinguish between: thermophilic, mesophilic, and psychrophilic. You see the temperature ranges below 25, between, let's say, well, 32, 35 to 45. It's not, it's flexible. Yeah, it's a flexible range, but it gives you an idea what mesophilic means. And thermophilic is the warmest you can run a digester at. Any higher than, well, I'd say, well, 60 is pretty ambitious. I'd actually say no higher than 55. Otherwise, your bacteria will at some point degrade. Yeah, these are the 3 main temperature ranges. And in Europe, or not only Europe, Canada as well, in the USA, you know, the most abundant temperature range we find is the mesophilic range, because it offers the most stable biocenosis, the most stable mixture of microbial species. It's a very high number of microbial species, and it's very stable. That means it's not so sensitive to changes. If the temperature changes, varies by a degree or 2 or 3 or 5, it doesn't make that much of a difference to mesophilic bacteria. Thermophilic bacteria are very sensitive to temperature changes. The range of species is smaller, and that makes it less stable. It's a very sensitive biocenosis, and that is why a lot of operators opt to go for mesophilic. Also, you need the heat to reach thermophilic, and many operators use the heat for other things. They sell their heat, for example, to heat swimming pools, for food production, or other applications. So mesophilic is the most common temperature range. Psychrophilic is most often found in unheated slurry lagoons. Now, that's why I showed you the picture earlier on. That was a slurry lagoon, and when the larger they get, the less likely it is that they are heated, and they're simply run at ambient temperature, which is around psychrophilic, depending on where you are. Okay, the view into the digester doesn't really, I mean, it tells you something. You see the gas bubbles, and you see if there's foaming, and you see if there's scum on top, and so on and so forth. But what you really want to know is, how's my process? How is it doing? Is it okay? Is it stable? Is there a problem? Can I feed more? Do I need to feed less? Has that new feedstock that I recently introduced had an impact? And that is why we run analysis on samples. This would be a classic report of a digester sample. You see here receipt date, pH, electric conductivity. We run that not on every site, only on sites with high electric conductivity. For example, in the Netherlands, they have waterlogged soils from the sea, and they have extremely high electric conductivity. So you'll have EC on every Dutch report. Volatile organic acids and TIC, that's the buffering capacity and volatile organic acids by titration. Ammonium, nitrogen, dry matter, organic dry matter, and then come the acids. And that's something that is very important. It tells us a lot. From the acids, we can pretty much always tell what's the matter with with a digester. That is acetic acid, propionic acid, butyric acid, isobutyric acid, valeric, isovaleric, and caproic acid. And on the very right, which is my favorite column, is the acetic acid equivalent. And that's not simply the sum of all the acids, because if you did the sum, you'd not end up with the number you see there, and you'd go, they don't know how to sum up acid concentrations. The acetic acid equivalent is very handy. It balances back the molecular weight of every single acid to acetic acid. They all weigh differently. All the different acids contain a different amount of of atoms, and that is why they have different molecular weights. And if we calculate that back to the weight of acetic acid, we can very easily compare between sites, and that makes the acetic acid equivalent a very, very valuable parameter. It's the first thing I look at. I read this report in the Arabic way. I start on the right. My first view goes to the acetic acid equivalent. And what you see here, for example, is a site that analyzes very regularly. Does the full species, does the full array, so that helps us a lot. And you see a slight accumulation in acetic acid and a slight accumulation of propionic acid. And propionic acid, for example, is an indicator for ammonia toxicity. Yeah, so this is how we work. We take samples, we have them analyzed in the lab, we look at data, and then we decide what's wrong or what's good in a site. Yeah, is it running smoothly, or can it do with a little help from their friends? Okay, potential problems. I mean, as I said, the process can be inhibited. Yeah, that is what I said earlier. And if only one stage is inhibited, all stages afterwards are inhibited as well, which will then lead to no gas production, which will lead to downtime in your biogas site. Yeah? The engine won't be running. If one stage is inhibited, then any stage downward of that is inhibited as well. And that's what we're going to look at now. Potential inhibitors in slurry and manure. Many sites use slurry and manure, and it is a very good substrate. It's a very good feedstock, especially solid manure. I'm a big fan of solid manure. It's a fantastic feedstock. It brings with it a lot of buffering capacity, fiber. It adds a lot of value to a diet. But vaccinations, antibiotics, pest control measures, disinfectants, and foot baths, if they are copper-based or formaldehyde-based, can cause inhibition in a digester. So if you're feeding or planning to feed slurry or manure, this is something to look out for. Are you yourself the farmer? Then you can easily have a handle on this. But if you're buying the slurry or the manure, have an eye out, talk to the farmer. What foot baths are they using? What disinfectants are they using? Formaldehyde has a terrible effect in the digester. It can bring it to a total standstill, and more often than not, it cannot be restarted. So formaldehyde is a very dangerous inhibitor. Also, antibiotics are very potent in some cases, and they degrade after a while, and you can dilute them, but they cause huge process problems if they are entered into the digester in larger concentrations. And with larger, I mean not very large concentrations. Yeah, if you have a large livestock a number, and you treat them with antibiotics, then this can cause massive problems in the digester. Potential inhibitors in silages. This is a picture of a silage, of a maize silage, corn silage. It's a very loose heap in front of a clamp, and the thermometer shows the temperature of the clamp, and it's at 51 degrees, nearly 52 degrees. So this is heating, and the little cloud you see there isn't dust, it's vapor. Yeah, so this silage is steaming hot, and this will lead to mold and yeast proliferation. And this can, in turn, some molds can cause mycotoxin formation. Mycotoxins are also very potent inhibitors. Ammonia inhibition is another very widespread inhibition. We have that very often. Risk feedstocks include anything that is protein rich, be it grass, cereals, or nitrogen rich, such as poultry manure and litter, rendering facility material, cheese, stillage, anything that is nitrogen rich. And the problem is that ammonium is converted into ammonia with increasing pH and with increasing temperature. Another reason why a lot of sites run under mesophilic conditions, at mesophilic temperatures. And this is the problem in many sites. They have high ammonium contents, they have a high pH. This is turned into ammonia, and if they run at too high temperatures, then they run into ammonia inhibition. Classic example, and you can detect that with high ammonium concentrations and high propionic acid concentrations. Here in grams, 3.6 grams and 4.3 grams is a lot. That is a very high concentration of propionic acid. It's a clear indicator for nitrogen, for ammonia toxicity. You can get a handle on this by diluting the material, by not feeding the nitrogen-rich feedstock or less of it. But very often that's not possible because you have the feedstock and you want to feed it. Maybe you have paid for it. So that is very often not an option. You could decrease the temperature, but if you're running at 40 degrees anyway, there's no way to go any further down. Then the process is very slow. And if you're running at a very high efficiency, you need the temperature to process the feedstocks you're feeding. So then what you're left with as an option is binder. There are ammonium binders available, and they bind ammonium selectively. So you can reduce the ammonia inhibition. You remove ammonium from the equation, ammonia is not generated, and so the ammonia toxicity is remedied. Another problem with nitrogen-rich feedstocks is hydrogen sulfide. That is toxic to bacteria and also to humans, by the way. It precipitates trace elements. So that's basically like stealing our vitamins from our diet. You eat fruit and vegetables and you're a good boy and girl and you eat your greens, but if something were to steal your vitamins from your diet, then you could eat as much spinach if you like, it wouldn't do you any good. And this is what hydrogen sulfide does. It precipitates trace elements. Also, and this is very different and has nothing to do with digester biology, it will corrode anything that comes into its path. It will corrode concrete, it will corrode any metal, and also the engine, and it will also corrode timber constructions. And that is why H2S needs to be removed from the gas and optimally also from the liquid in the digester. And that is why we promote or recommend a cascading concept of desulfurization for biological reasons and also for technical reasons. You start with iron hydroxide in the digester. So you remove part of the H2S from the liquid itself. You avoid trace element precipitation. You avoid inhibition of the bacteria. As a second step, you can dose air or oxygen into the headspace. This will lead to sulfur bacteria colonizing the headspace surfaces and retracting the H2S from the gas. And as a third step, you can use an external filter based on activated carbon or iron products to remove the last traces of H2S before the gas enters the CHP or gas treatment units. Gas treatment units require 0 ppm H2S. Yeah, they cannot tolerate any H2S, whereas CHPs are recommended to be run at 0 ppm, but they can tolerate a bit of it. The H2S will also acidify the engine oil, so you have shorter operational times for the engine oil, which again causes costs. Yeah? Engine oil costs money, so the less often you need to change it, the better. So desulfurization is a crucial step in optimizing your site biologically as well as technically. Okay, to sum up inhibition countermeasures as such. Yeah? Best way to get rid of an inhibition would be to identify the toxic substance that is the feedstock. More often than not, that is actually pretty tricky, because usually a biogas plant's diet consists of a whole range of feedstocks, up to 10, 15 different ones, changing ones at varying tonnages, at varying qualities. So the identification of a toxic substance is actually difficult. Yeah. If you were to think this is my culprit, this is my toxic substance, you could decrease it. You could feed less of it, if that is possible. Yeah. If it's, for example, an antibiotic contaminated slurry, you need to remove it from the diet as long as it is contaminated. You cannot feed that any longer, as well as formaldehyde contaminated slurry or manure. That is something that you need to remove at once. What you can then do is you can dilute the digester, the inhibited digester content. You can add water, slurry, watery feedstock like fizzy drinks, for example, beer that has gone off, or milk that cannot go to human consumption. Yeah, so something like that. You can use that for dilution. You should reseed, that is, add fresh inoculum, for example, digester content from an unaffected digester or post-digester, from your neighbor's digester. Yeah, maybe there is another biogas site nearby that could give you a hand, and you could get some fresh uninhibited digester material. You could use binder, for example, for ammonium, for hydrogen sulfide, yeah, as mentioned, iron hydroxide. And also there are also binders available for mycotoxins. If you are feeding spoiled silages, there are binders for mycotoxins, but you need to remove the toxic substance as well. You cannot keep on feeding antibiotics, formaldehyde, mycotoxins, or ammonium. You need to find a way to get the inhibition under control. And also, we'll come to that also in a minute, addition of trace elements to support microbial recovery. You remember the two disc diagrams I showed you. So after an inhibition, you'll have lost species and bacterial numbers, and you need to replenish them by reseeding and by giving the digester time and trace elements, because the bacteria have very particular demands for trace elements. We'll come to that. Yeah, that's the next topic, I think. This is just to give you an overview of a potential process failures. There is a whole range, just like illnesses for humans or for animals. There is a lot of tricky bits in a digester as well. Digesters can acidify due to overfeeding, due to inhibition or temperature changes, or to trace element deficiency. Low gas yields can be caused by leakages, by inhibition, again, inadequate mixing, which brings us later to viscosity problems. Mechanical problems can lead to foaming, can lead to floating layers or sedimentation. So all sorts of issues can happen in a biogas site. And it is definitely advisable to have a consultant, to have somebody you can turn to who will supply you with the knowledge, with the expertise, and with the products that you need in the case of those failures. There we are. So, which brings us to one of the main problems in biogas sites, apart from ammonia inhibition, that is a big one, and trace element deficiency is another one. Ammonia inhibition is not so easily remedied. It takes a while, takes binder, takes tackling the problem. Trace element deficiency, on the other hand, is an easy one. All bacteria require trace elements, and if you run your biogas plant at a very high efficiency, like an Olympic sprinter, you know, if you're Usain Bolt, you don't eat spaghetti carbonara for dinner. You have special food, you get vitamin supplements, you get mineral supplements, you get all sorts of special food and special treatment. And this is exactly what your digester needs if you want to run it at high efficiency. Trace elements, I'm sure, or I don't know, but the law of the minimum is probably everyone's encountered that at one or other points in their education. It's basically good old Liebig's barrel. Yeah, if one element is missing, this will limit the production of crops and of animals and also of biogas production. And in the case of biogas production, anaerobic bacteria need special trace elements. They're not like the classic ones that we like or animals like. Bacteria need different ones, especially the very old archaic methanogens. They're very old, and they basically grew in an environment where other trace elements were widely available, such as tungsten, molybdenum, nickel, cobalt, and selenium. That's what we call the big five. These are super essential trace elements, and in very few digesters, they do not need to be replaced. So almost all digesters need trace element supplements to run at high efficiency, and they need the big five and a few more like manganese, zinc, copper, and a couple of others. Also iron. Yeah. So this is to give you an idea. Again, analysis, we take a sample, we analyze for trace elements. We don't just think or guess or maybe, we measure and then we know. In this case, this is a digester analysis, and it shows, look at the, look on the right, aerobic way, very high acetic acid equivalent. And this indicate, and then the single acids indicate isovaleric is very high, isobutyric acid is very high, propionic and acetic are very high. That indicates trace element deficiency. So what we then do is, again, not guess, but measure. Sample, and we measure the trace elements. And we can see that indeed the site was deficient in nickel in that case. Iron is a bit on the low side, but definitely nickel, cobalt, molybdenum, and tungsten. So 4 of the big 5 were missing. Selenium was okay. And this is normal. It doesn't necessarily have to be that all trace elements are deficient. It can be that only some are deficient. Yeah? Also a macro element, sodium, was deficient. And copper, on the other hand, was very high. That is not unusual when that is a slurry-based plant. Slurry comes with high copper and zinc levels. And this is something that we can't do anything about. Once it's in, it's in. Yeah. So we don't have a binder for high copper, but once the trace element is in the digester, we cannot lower it. We can only add deficient trace elements, which is what we did. So we formulate our trace element mix. The blends that we sell are based on analysis, and we only add the elements that are in deficiency, and we add them in the quantities that are necessary, not more, not less. And so that after micronutrient dosage, the picture is a very different one. We also added sodium in this case, so the deficiency was alleviated, and we added nickel and all the other elements that were in deficiency, and the copper is where it was before because there's nothing we can do about it. And then the acids go down after treatment. Sorry, I need to go back. The acids go down. So this is after treatment, and then the operator stops using trace elements and the acids go up again. It's a classic. Trace elements are used, acids go down, trace elements are then dropped off the diet and acids increase again. Okay, so this is the way we operate. We measure and formulate according to analysis. We also have standard mixtures. We know a crop-based, slurry-based site has probably this demand for trace elements, and we have standard mixes that are custom made for these situations. But we prefer to go bespoke. Yeah, so this is basically, I mean, this is now with ammonia inhibition and trace element deficiency, you have the two major inhibition or process failure reasons that you most often occur in biogas sites. Other inhibitors are rarer, but they occur. And H2S, hydrogen sulfide, can also be a problem. Yeah. Now we're moving a bit away from inhibition and process failure as such, but we're moving into high viscosity issues. Viscosity is basically the mixability of a substrate. How well and how easy can I stir it with the stirrers I have? Most likely high viscosity is due to high fiber loads. That is grass silage, manure, one of my favorite feedstocks, but yes, it comes with straw. Also when straw is being fed, when whole crop hasn't been chopped short enough, there are all sorts of fibrous feedstocks that can lead to high viscosity. If that is coupled with high organic loading, that is high feedstock input into the digester and low retention times, that is low time in the digester, and low process temperature, that can lead to viscosity issues because the bacteria, the enzymes the bacteria produce, they are not working fast enough. They are temperature dependent. Enzymes always are temperature dependent, and the higher the temperature, the better they work. And the more time the bacteria have, the more efficient they will break down fibrous feedstocks. And if time is insufficient, and maybe temperature is insufficient, or maybe there is an inhibition, then you end up with high viscosity. And that can look like that. High viscosity can lead to dead zones. We call that in a digester. This is a simulation of a digester. It's a centrally stirred digester, and you can see the red area is the highest velocity of mixing, and it decreases towards the outer ring, towards the outer area of the digester. And if the viscosity is higher, is increased, this high velocity area is broken up. And the fewer high viscosity areas you have, the more dead zones you have. The more zones you have in a three-dimensional digester, imagine it three-dimensional, that are not stirred, that are not mixed. So feedstock is not transported to the bacteria. The bacteria can't move themselves, so they need to be brought to the feedstocks. And also what happens is in those dead zones is that bacteria break down feedstock, acids are produced, the pH drops locally. So you have acid nests, we call them in digesters. And if those acid nests are mixed at some point, they will cause buffering. Yeah. And when the buffer in the digester, it's a hydrogen carbonate buffer, when that buffers, the hydrogen carbonate is turned into CO2, and the CO2, that is a very rapid reaction within seconds, and rapid gas production, be it CO2 or biogas, can cause foaming. So formation of dead zones is not only a problem in substrate utilization. Yeah, the feedstocks aren't broken down, they're not degraded, so gas is not produced from them, but they can also cause foaming. They can cause mechanical problems, because if feedstock isn't properly distributed in a digester, if it accumulates, for example, in some spot and is then transported to a stirrer, the stirrer might actually be damaged by that high amount of feedstock. So formation of dead zones is very undesirable. And the worst dead zone of all is the floating layer. This is, you can see that 3 tanks in a row. The last one is open, or that's a storage tank that hasn't been stirred properly, and you see the roof has been opened. There is an external stirrer going into the tank. This is external, it's stirring the tank, and this whole area here, what you see on top, it's not liquid, it's solid. It's solid material that's floated to the top, undigested fibrous material. And the floating layer is the worst dead zone of all. It can be broken down by enzymes, by enzyme products to a certain degree, but there are limits to what enzyme products can achieve. Yeah, so this is something that you want to avoid at all costs because it costs a lot. Operational downtime, opening of a tank, it's messy, it's dangerous, the external stirrer costs a lot of money, and then you're not even sure the floating layer won't reform when you've closed the lid again. Yeah, so floating layers are the worst case. Try to avoid them at all costs. So enzymes, for everyone who's been to a biology class, you probably know that enzymes work like scissors. Yeah, they can cut molecules in little pieces. And in this instance, fiber is mostly composed of cellulose. That's the main component of cell walls, and is very difficult to reach for enzymes. And it's also very difficult to cleave, to snip into parts. And that's what enzymes do. We sell enzyme products that are customized for various feedstocks. For example, we have one enzyme product that is specialized on grass, one that is specialized on straw, and that will very effectively cleave those fibrous components and leave them very pliable and soft, easy to stir, and obviously they also yield the gas. And those enzymes are hydrolytic enzymes. So we basically add more of what is already there. It's a bit like, I don't like the word doping really. But it's a bit like doping. You know, we dope the digester and it runs at a higher efficiency. It becomes more efficient at breaking down fiber. And then it avoids those dead zones, foaming and damages and floating layers and all the rest of it. That's what enzymes can do. Last but not least, I have 5 minutes left. I keep looking at my watch. Last but not least, I showed you earlier, I showed you analysis. I showed you increasing acids, yeah, that are produced during those 4 stages. And depending on which acid, you can tell what the problem is. Propionic acid points to ammonia inhibition. Iso acids point to trace element deficiency. But there is a point when the acids become too much for a digester, and that is called acidification. It also occurs in cow stomachs, so maybe if we have animal nutritionists in the audience, you know what I'm talking about. This graph is very old. I did it during many years ago with lab reactors, and it shows the TAC. It's called the TAC. It's the buffering capacity, the hydrogen carbonate buffer, that is responsible for keeping the pH stable and neutralizing acids. Then in green you have the pH, and in red the volatile fatty acids. And you see here the buffer slightly increases. I added slurry, so that's always good. Buffer slightly increases, pH is stable, no significant volatile fatty acid accumulation. All good. Then I started to treat the digester badly. I fed it more and more and more until the acids started to rise and the buffer started to decrease. That is because the buffer neutralizes the acids and is used up in the process. Yeah, it's an open buffer system and it escapes as CO2. So when there is acid accumulation, you have a decrease in buffer capacity. But good news was, for a long time, pH was being kept stable. That is good. The pH is, next to temperature, the most important environmental parameter for the bacteria. They want to keep that stable. So that's what the buffer does. But there is a point when the buffer is depleted by all the acids that are being produced. And when the buffer is depleted, the pH will start to drop. So the environment for the bacteria changes. It's a bit like beaming us to the top of Everest from oxygen content 20% to oxygen content, I have no idea, 15%. I don't know what it is on Mount Everest. So you'd find it very, very hard to cope in these environments. And that is exactly what happens to the bacteria. Some bacteria, especially the methanogens, don't like that at all, whereas acidogenic and acetogenic bacteria like it. So they keep on producing, and the pH keeps on dropping, and the methanogens keep on striking. That is acidification. That is what it looks like. It can be treated with sodium bicarbonate is one major remedy for acidification. If you add that, you add buffering capacity, you stabilize the pH. As soon as the pH is stabilized, bacteria will start working again, metabolize the accumulated VFA, and the process goes back to normal. The gas side of things looks like that. That is CH4 and CO2. And during acidification, you see a very high peak in CO2. And that is not due to the bacteria suddenly doing something else. That is the buffer, the hydrogen carbonate that is escaping in the form of CO2. And CH4 is no longer or very in a very diminished way produced. So your CHP is at a standstill and CH4 is very low. And after recovery, CH4 goes back to normal, to even supernormal. That's great. You don't need to feed anything. It's fantastic time. No CO2, lots of CH4. Your CHP doesn't know where to put all that gas. So this is acidification. And this was fundamentals of anaerobic digestion in a very, very small nutshell, a tiny nutshell. I tried to cut it as short as possible, but still not falsify the facts, which is always difficult. But this is what we do. This is what me and my team do. We consult for biogas sites, we troubleshoot, we help with problems, we optimize sites on site, on the telephone, video, Zoom, Teams. And we have partners on the ground that help us do it. And that is why we can very proudly say we believe to be the market leader, because we operate worldwide and tap into a fantastic net of biogas experts. Thank you so much for your attention. It was a real privilege being here and giving this presentation. And I'm looking forward to questions if we have the time, or you can reach me at my email that you find there.
Thank you, Melanie. It was such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you to Victor for bringing you here. And there are many comments about the great conference you have given us.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, we cannot extend more this conference, but okay, you are welcome to other events of Consejo Nacional de Biogás.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, you pick a topic. It's most likely to be ammonia inhibition or trace element deficiency, but you pick any topic, also forage conservation, ensiling. I don't know if that is of interest, or other things, other topics.
Okay, Melanie.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
We'll see you soon.
See you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Gracias a todos por asistir. Les recuerdo que pueden afiliarse al Consejo Nacional de Biogás. Visiten la página. Gracias a todos por su asistencia. Disculpen las fallas técnicas. Aquí está lloviendo y hubo unas fallas de conexión. Pero gracias a todos por su asistencia. Hasta luego.